Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathashala. I am Dr. K.R. Ram Mohan, Associate Professor, Head Department of Anthropology, Sikkim University. Today we are going to talk a module on ecological theories, which includes cultural ecology, system ecology and political ecology. This module comes in the paper Theories and Methods in Social and Cultural Anthropology. So before we go this module, let us see what are the learning objectives. We are able to define the concept and the characteristics of ecological theories, basically the cultural ecology, system ecology and the political ecology. To probe into the emergence of all the ecological theories, to able to define the major contemporary anthropological understanding of ecological theories of ecological functionalism and system ecology. Now, what is ecological theory? Ecological theory is unique in its focus of humans as biological organisms and social beings which are in interaction with their immediate environment. So there are two concepts here. One is human beings. Human beings are basically both biological entities and they are social beings. Biological entities in a sense that we are like any other organism in this nature, like any other animal, like snake or like a lion or like a dog in that sense. And we are social beings. We have culture, we have communication, we have thinking ability. With these things we can say that we are social beings. So, and we live in a certain environment. So ecological understanding or ecological perspective is to look how man interacts with his immediate environment. It could be of any type of environment in which human beings live for a longer period of time. It is considered to be an energy transformation system that is interdependent with its natural, physical, biological, human built and the all socio-cultural milieu which has been surrounded in that environment. Meaning, human ecological theory is more inclusive. It doesn't exclude anything. And it focuses a range of human populations across this globe. Why certain society is like that? Why society is like that with that kind of an environment? So, ecological theory gives basically to the creative faculties of humankind, the use and the management of the available resources that are in that given environment. Additionally, ecological theory or ecological perspectives will give insight on how people are creative in adapting to their own ecological situations. So, a recurrent theme occurs in ecological studies is adaptation. Adaptation to environment. So, environment could be two types, biotic and abiotic. Biotic means all the living organisms. Abiotic could be all the resources, the mountains, the rivers, the soils, the plants, which comes under abiotic. So how do human beings in a given culture use, manipulate and sustain these biotic and abiotic environments? And with these things, how human beings develop in a long sustainable way. So before we go in detail about the whole aspects of ecological perspective and ecological theories, let us come to the simplest understanding of the word ecology. So basically ecology is defined by Ernst Haeckel, a German zoologist who's also proposed the theory of evolution. So Ernst Haeckel asserted that individual, that means man, was a product of cooperation between the environment and the organizable heredity. So there are two components here, physical component and the biological component. And proposed that a science to be developed to study the organisms in their own environments. So ecology was defined as the study of the interrelationship between organisms or life and their immediate environment, both organic and inorganic. As I said, biotic and abiotic. So it rests the assumption that life and environment are inseparable and parts of the greater whole. That means our life is much influenced by the environment in which we live and which we sustain for a longer period of time. How does these two go? Which one is influencing what? So some anthropologists are concerned mostly with the influence of environment on culture. It is also called environmentalism or environmental determinism. That means environment dictates culture. Julian Stewart was one of the first one to advocate the study of cultural ecology. There are two words here, ecology and culture. We understood what is ecology and we know what is culture. So we are combining these two, cultural ecology. That means ecology is influenced by culture or the interaction between culture and ecology. So the analysis of the relationship between culture and its immediate environment. So Stewart felt that an explanation for some aspects of cultural variation could be found in the adaptation of societies to their particular environments. Meaning that why a culture A is different from culture B. This difference can be explained not like any other explanation which you understood in previous lessons, but cultural variations could be understood and explained through individual ecological adaptations to their environment. That is how a possible explanation can be made. Be it a simple cultural trait to a complex cultural trait, can be conceptualized through this ecological approach. So how do they adapt to their immediate environments? So cultural ecology differs from human and social ecology in that sense, seeking to explain the origin of particular cultural features and patterns which they characterize the different areas, than just giving a general principles applicable for cultural environmental situation. Now, being understood that cultural ecology looks for the interaction between these two, and possible explanations can be made. Let us see what is the method of this culture ecology. So the concept of environmental adaptation, which is underlying mechanism for cultural ecology, the procedures must take into account the complexity and the level of the culture. Only then it makes a great deal of difference. In a sense, whether a community consists of hunters or gatherers who submit independently by their own efforts, or somebody has told them to do that, and why there is difference of energy levels in some other cultures like an advanced culture, and why some society is still being a hunter-gathering society. Can we ascribe that because of this availability of technology, availability of tools and techniques, there is some kind of a mechanism to harness energy and a productive arrangement which gives a cultural history to that particular society? Now, to understand these variations, that society A has this and society B has this, simple society and complex society with complex technologies, the procedures of ecology or cultural ecology is that to see the interrelationship between or of exploitative of productive technology and the immediate environment. To put it simply, one should understand, yes, what is this environment here, what kind of environment it is there, and what kind of productive technology this society has should be analyzed. This is a marine community, so marine environment. So what kind of technology they have? This is an agricultural land. So what kind of technology they have? With that, we can come to a conclusion that this culture has this kind of a material culture. So what is material culture here, which also has connections to the economy? For example, in primitive societies, subsistence devices are basic, like weapons, instruments for hunting, instruments for some tools for collecting, or to some extent fishing. And you need to have some containers to collect these food materials. You need to have something to store the collected food. That forms the material culture. So what does it mean? So material culture is giving some kind of a clue to what kind of technology and what kind of technology is related to the environment. And if you go to other places, the kind of transformational devices used on land and water, the sources of water and fuel, and in some environments, means of counteracting excessive cold, like for example clothing and housing. In cold high altitude places, in high altitude and high cold places, people go with heavy clothing because the heat should not be gone out of your body. At the same time, you look in the tropical climates, people wear simple clothes, cotton clothes, the less amount of clothes, because air should pass through your body. So what does it mean? So that is culture of a simple dressing pattern, or your housing, heaters, warmers, because you are in a cold place. And the same thing vice versa is in the tropical climate. You need air conditioners, you need a lot of air to come into your house. So this kind of diversity, this kind of, whether it is simple or complex, the tool techniques gives you many clues for understanding how people counterattack their immediate environment. Not only just a material culture, the procedures also required to see the behavioral patterns in these environments and how they exploit by particular technology must be also analyzed. Some cultures or some societies have low levels of technology because it requires only that much of your energy levels, like simple hunting and just hunting the wild vegetables in small groups. So that kind of a collective behavior you can see. There is cooperation among themselves. There is less competition among yourself. That shows how the behavioral patterns. And you can also see the division of labor among themselves. You do this work, you do this work, you collect, you bring it, I will sort it out. So it is a collective effort or an endeavor. And hunting is a different way. It could be individual, or sometimes people will go together. It also requires some kind of cooperation. And once you have to bring it back, somebody should sort it out. And look at different kind of occupation like fishing. In the marine ecological zone, it is a group activity again. It needs different type of technology, not like an agricultural technology. It requires different skill set, unlike hunting and gathering. Fishing in the marine shores, in the sea, or inland fishing requires a different behavioral pattern, different technology, different types of skill set required to do this occupation. That gives a complete understanding of how people incorporate the group activity or individual activity according to the environment. Another procedure in ascertaining in ecological theory or ecological perspective is that to what extent the behavior patterns entitled in exploiting the environment, or in what extent this affects the different aspects of culture. Although technology and environment gives clues to the culture that certain things must be done in certain ways, and if they are not done at all, we cannot come to this point. And these are all functional aspects of a particular culture. Now, what is more important is that to what degree, to what extent these things should be put in practice. This is an important empirical investigation the ethnographer must know from the ecological perspective. Whether culture allows, to what level, to what is the maximum point of this behavior pattern, or it defines that okay, you should do only this way, you should not go beyond this way, otherwise you don't get that result, otherwise you lose that kind of a thing. So that kind of empirical investigation is important while combining or while taking these two aspects of both the environment at one hand and the technology at the other. Now, this procedure requires a genuinely holistic approach. As we all know, anthropology is the science of man or science of humankind, which basically requires a holistic understanding. It is not just only one part of mankind. It has to be studied in its holistic perspective, biological, cultural, archaeological, linguistic, psychological. Only then we can comprehend and conceive and understand humanity in its entirety. So for that, we need to understand the factors such as demography. Demography in a sense that the population, nature of population, structure of population, men, women, the ratio between men and women, the birth rate, the death rate, the settlement pattern. How do this population have settled? Why did they settle here? What are the ways of their settlement? Their kinship structures, how they categorize among themselves, how did they use their, or how to come to their grips of marriage, alliance, the way they use their land, and all other cultural features should be taken into consideration. And again, we can see some kind of a functional aspect of these cultural elements, that these things are interrelated. We cannot rule out a functional interrelationship here, though not the entire functionalist approach here, but how, which influences what in that connection. In relation to the environment, please remember that. Unless if we don't consider these things, the entire meaning cannot be grasped, or the entire meaning cannot be come into grips. Now, when we say land use by a given technology in a particular society, to what extent, how many people are using that land? If it is a small society, very small density, like 100 houses, and you have large this thing, to what extent, how many people are using the land? That gives the population density. Upon how much land people are living? Is it a high density or is it a low density? And to what extent their land are using? Now, we should also understand what is this methodological place in this cultural ecology. Now, cultural ecology has been described as a methodological tool, again reiterating the point that ascertaining how the adaptation of a culture to its environment and what are the changes that have taken place. So, in a larger sense, the whole issue or the whole problem is to determine whether there any similar adjustment occur in similar environments. You take some place here, same rainfall, same water resources, same land pattern, same population size, and the same thing is also happening the other side. So how did they adapt the same similar environment? And if it's the same, why they have changes here, and why there are, this is different and this is different? What makes them similar and what makes them different? So in any given environment, so culture may develop through these or through a succession of historical periods. It is something pointed out that environment perhaps it could be constant, obviously has no relationship to cultural types. But we need to see to what extent this socio-cultural integration as represented in each period. So cultural types, therefore, must be conceived as a constellation of core features which arise out of these environmental adaptations, which might lead to similar levels of integration. Now, let us understand the concept of political ecology. So what is political? There are two words again here, ecology and political aspects. So what is the political angle towards ecology? So political ecology is a term that describes the or gives meaning of a community of practice united around certain kind of a text. The nature of this community and all that theories and empirical evidences which gives clues to the conditions, the changes within the social system, which is in relation to the power relations. Why and how the social environmental changes takes place. Some are better, some there is no coercion at all, some very less exploitative, and some are in a very sustainable way for a long time. Political ecology tries to see the problems, including the situations in a society, like for example, starvation, malnutrition, soil erosion, landlessness, decline of resources, less biodiversity, human health crisis, which are dangerous conditions for the social actors in that area. Why it happens there? Why there is malnutrition in one society? It could be ascribed through political ecology. Is it an institutional deficit? Is it a governance problem? Is it just a lack of resources there? If that is the case, resources are there. And if resources are there, why there is malnutrition there? Or why there is starvation there? Is it a problem with the leadership there? If there is soil erosion, is it due to the faulty practice of certain commercial activities there? With that commercial activities, there is some kind of a soil erosion. So like that, we can go on and try to see why these maladies, why this maladjustment towards environment is taking place. Is it a human issue or is it an environmental issue? If it is not just an environmental issue per se, but there is a human angle towards that environmental issue, and that becomes political ecology. Now, to deal this political ecology, research also suggests that, which has to look into these factors like the possibility for community collective action. If there is absence of community collective action in that given environment, perhaps it could lead to starvation, or it could lead to some other environmental problem. For example, pollution, which is a serious environmental issue and concern. Environment is like that only, but who is polluting the environment? It becomes a political issue because there is lack of collective action to address that issue. The role of human labor in environmental metabolism, that why we are not sustaining the required environmental balance from a nature's point of view. And people are not ready to take certain risks to put things in perspective. We are lacking that in the human behavior to restore the balance of the human environment. And people are corrupt. Politicians are corrupt. Wrong, faulty political practices for self-interest, not for the community interest. Lastly, there is no proxy between knowledge and power. We know everything about nature, we know everything about environment, but due to faulty power relations, there is some kind of disturbance in the environment. So in that sense, one has to see how the issues of adaptation, change, and the environmental fit, who is fit there. To take it further, the problem of closure, the related issues of variation and comparison, and adaptation. If the central theme of adaptation is important in ecological perspective, which claims that there is a change in our behavior. If there is no change in our behavior, we are not adaptive to the environment, because sometimes environment changes in long term and people are ready to adapt to that situation. It requires a change in the social behavior. It could be change in their occupation, it could be change in the technology, it could be change in the culture. That should be done. And that is important to record from an ecological perspective. So here, who are the stakeholders? The individual, the kin network groups, all the social classes, communities, governance, which, if they are not adaptive and contribute to the reproduction, then it will not result what we call environmentally fit or environmental fit. You becomes defunct. A society becomes eroded. To summarize, if the earlier thinking, the philosophical thinking, has not been seriously taken into human condition, we cannot arrive into larger theoretical approaches. So, cultural ecology seeks to understand the relationship between cultures and their physical and social environment. Cultural ecologists question how a particular cultural trait is adaptive in its environment. Hence, the theoretical orientation called political economy focuses on the impact of external and political and economic process, particularly colonialism and imperialism, on all the local events and cultures, mostly in the underdeveloped world. That is the reason most cultures are impoverished, in a sense that there are resources, but we do not know how to explore that. Even though you have plenty of resources, but the resources are not yours, it is in somebody's hand. That leads to deprivation, that leads to malnutrition. So one has to understand the political angle towards these ecological processes. So in this context, the political economy approach has reminded that all parts of the world are interconnected, either for advantage or disadvantage. There is too much of interconnection with all the cultures, but some are gaining better, some are becoming better, and some are becoming worse.